The last photo of my father was with a lion. The African sun beat down mercilessly as I stepped off the small propeller plane, my boots meeting the dusty airstrip for the first time in 15 years. The familiar scent of dry grass and wild sage rushed over me like a wave of memories. This was Masai Mara place, where my father had lived, worked, and ultimately died. "Welcome back, Mr. Harlow," said the driver waiting beside a weathered Land Rover. "I'm Jabari. I knew your father." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Everyone here had known my father. Daniel Harlow had been a legend among wildlife photographers, spending more time with the animals than with his own family. His photos of the great beasts of Africa had graced the covers of National Geographic and countless other publications. "It's been a long time," I finally managed, throwing my bag into the back of the vehicle. "Too long," Jabari agreed. "The land remembers you, though. The land always remembers." As we drove through the savannah, I found myself studying the horizon, searching for something I couldn't name. The last time I'd been here, I was 22 and full of anger at my father for choosing this wild place over our family, anger at the news of his death, anger at myself for not having visited more while he was alive. Now, at 37, I felt only a hollow ache where that anger had once burned. "Why now?" Jabari asked as we bounced along the rutted track. "After all these years?" I pulled out a worn envelope from my jacket pocket and handed it to him. Inside was a satellite photo showing coordinates, sent anonymously to my London apartment 3 weeks earlier. The only note read, "What your father left behind." "I received this," I said. "No name, no return address." Jabari studied the image, his weathered face creasing with recognition. "This is the Northern Territory, your father's favorite spot to photograph the Kibali pride." "The lions he was with when he died?" Jabari nodded solemnly. "The same." The silence between us filled with unspoken questions. My father had been found dead near his camp 15 years ago, apparently from a heart attack while photographing lions. His camera was missing, presumed stolen by poachers who had discovered his body. All that remained were the photos he'd already sent back to his editors. The final images of Daniel Harlow's remarkable career were forever lost. Or so we thought. I had come back to find whatever it was my father had left behind. But more than that, I had come back to finally make peace with his memory. The therapist I'd been seeing in London had called it closure, but that clinical term seemed inadequate for the storm of emotions swirling within me. As the Land Rover crested a hill, the conservation lodge came into view, a cluster of high-end tents and wooden structures nestled among acacia trees. This would be my base for the expedition into the Northern Territory. "We'll leave at dawn tomorrow," Jabari said. "The journey to those coordinates will take most of the day." I nodded, watching a herd of impala scatter as our vehicle approached. "I'll be ready." That night, sleep eluded me. I lay on the cot in my tent, listening to the distant roar of lions and the closer chattering of nightbirds. These were the sounds that had lulled my father to sleep for decades. These were the sounds he had chosen over the suburban quiet of our home in England. As a child, I had worshipped him, this larger-than-life figure, who appeared for a few weeks each year, bearing incredible stories and photographs of dangerous beasts. As a teenager, I had resented him for his absences, for missing birthdays and graduations. As an adult, I had tried to understand him, visiting once during university and again after I'd begun my own career as a photojournalist. But true understanding had remained elusive, and now he was gone. My thoughts were interrupted by a peculiar sound outside my tent, a deep, resonant breathing that didn't belong to any of the usual nighttime creatures. Grabbing my flashlight, I cautiously unzipped the tent flap and peered out. In the silver moonlight stood a massive male lion, not 20 feet from where I stood. His mane was dark and streaked with gray, his body bearing the scars of a long life in the wild. He was staring directly at me, amber eyes reflecting the beam of my flashlight. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no fence separating us, no barrier between man and beast. I was completely vulnerable. The lion blinked slowly, then turned and walked a few paces before looking back at me. He repeated this movement, as if beckoning me to follow. "Impossible," I whispered. But the lion waited, its gaze unwavering. I had heard stories from my father, tales of lions that remembered individual humans, of animals that seemed to possess wisdom beyond our understanding. I had dismissed these as the romantic notions of a man who spent too much time in the wild. Now, faced with this ancient creature, I wasn't so sure. With trembling hands, I reached for my camera professional habitant, took a few shots of the lion silhouetted against the moonlit savanna. Then, against all logic and survival instinct, I stepped out of the tent. The lion watched me approach, maintaining a distance that felt both cautious and deliberate. When I stopped, he moved forward again, continuing his strange invitation. "Are you real?" I whispered, wondering if grief and jet lag had pushed me into hallucination. The lion answered with a low rumble, not a growl, but something more like acknowledgement. Then he turned and began walking away, his pace slow and measured. After a moment's hesitation, I followed. Dawn broke over the savanna in a spectacular display of crimson and gold. I hadn't slept, having spent the night following the gray-maned lion across the grasslands. The rational part of my mind screamed that this was madness, following a wild predator into the African wilderness, with nothing but a camera and a small canteen of water. But something deeper, something I couldn't explain, compelled me forward. The lion maintained a steady pace, occasionally stopping to ensure I was still following. He led me northeast, toward the very coordinates marked on the mysterious satellite photo. By mid-morning, the heat had become oppressive, and my water was running low. Still, I pressed on, drawn by the enigmatic behavior of this magnificent animal. Around noon, I spotted a baobab tree in the distance, a landmark I recognized from my father's photographs. The ancient tree, with its massive trunk and sparse, finger-like branches, had been a favorite subject of his. As we approached, the lion veered toward it, and I realized with a start that this wasn't just any baobab. This was the tree that had appeared in the background of countless photos taken by my father over the years. The lion circled the massive trunk and then sat in its shade, watching me expectantly. As I drew closer, I noticed something unnatural about the base of the tree. A small hollow had been sealed with rock stacked in a deliberate pattern. It was unmistakably human work, not the random arrangement of nature. My hands trembled as I began removing the stones. The lion watched, unmoving, as if standing guard over this secret place. When I'd cleared enough rocks away, I peered into the hollow. Inside was a metal box, weathered but intact, protected from the elements by its stone cover. With reverent hands, I pulled it out and sat cross-legged in the shade of the baobab. The lion remained nearby, his amber eyes never leaving me. The box was locked, but the key hung from a leather cord around its handle. Inside, I found two treasures: my father's final journal and a roll of undeveloped film, carefully sealed in a protective case. The journal's pages were filled with my father's distinctive handwriting, flowing yet precise, much like the man himself. I began to read, aware that the lion had settled even closer, his massive head resting on his paws as if listening to the story about to unfold. April 17, 2009, the Kabali Pride has accepted me in a way I never thought possible. After tracking them for 3 decades, I've become part of their landscape. The old male, whom I've named Solomon for his wisdom, seems to understand what I'm doing with my cameras. Today, he brought down a wildebeest and then waited, as if posing, while I captured the moment. There's an intelligence in his eyes that transcends the barrier between our species. I wonder if my son would understand this connection if he were here. Thomas has his mother's practical nature, her grounding in reality. I've failed him in many ways, choosing this life over being present for his. The photos I've taken, the moments I've captured, they're my attempt to show him that this sacrifice was worthwhile, that I've been documenting something precious and fleeting for future generations. But perhaps that's just my justification for following my passion at the expense of my family. I paused, feeling a lump form in my throat. The journal entry continued, detailing observations about the pride and my father's growing concern about poachers in the area. Then came an entry that made my breath catch. April 22, 2009. I heard gunshots to the north today. Solomon was agitated, pacing and roaring toward the sound. I fear poachers have entered the reserve. Tomorrow I'll investigate, though Jabari has warned me to stay away. Some of these men are dangerous, desperate, but if they're targeting the Kibali pride, I cannot stand by and do nothing. The next entry, dated April 23, was brief and chilling. Found poacher camp. They have heavy weapons, taking photos as evidence. Will deliver to authorities tomorrow. Solomon has been following me all day, as if he senses danger. If anything happens to me, I've left instructions with the film. That was the final entry. My father had died on April 24, 15 years ago to the day. I looked up from the journal to find the lion Solomon watching me with an intensity that seemed to transcend the animal realm. Could this truly be the same lion my father had named? Lions rarely live beyond 15 years in the wild, but it wasn't impossible. "Did you know him?" I whispered, feeling foolish for speaking to the beast, yet unable to help myself. "Did you know my father?" Solomon blinked slowly, then rose to his feet with the deliberate movements of an aging predator. He turned and began walking again, this time with purpose. I followed, clutching the journal and film to my chest, drawn forward by an inexplicable connection to this animal and to the father I had never truly known. By late afternoon, we had covered miles of savanna and were entering a more wooded area. Solomon moved with increasing urgency, occasionally looking back to ensure I was keeping pace. My water was gone, my legs ached, and the rational part of my mind was screaming that I had lost all sense of direction and safety. But something stronger kept me moving a need to complete this strange pilgrimage. Eventually, we emerged into a small clearing beside a gentle stream. Here, Solomon stopped and sat, his gaze fixed on a spot across the water. Following his line of sight, I noticed the remains of what had once been a campsite fire pit ringed with stones, the ghostly outline of where a tent had stood, marked by slightly higher grass in a rectangular pattern. With a jolt of recognition, I realized this was my father's campus final camp. Solomon let out a soft, rumbling sound that seemed to reverberate through the clearing. Then he crossed the stream with surprising grace for his age and walked to the center of the old campsite. There he lay down, his massive head resting on his paws, watching me. I approached cautiously, my camera ready more from habit than intent. As I crossed the stream, following in Solomon's footsteps, I felt a strange sense of completion, as if I were closing a circle that had been left open for 15 years. The campsite revealed little at first glance. Nature had reclaimed most signs of human presence, but, as I explored more carefully, I noticed a particular tree at the edge of the clearing. Carved into its bark was a small, weathered X that would be meaningless to anyone but a man who had taught his young son the excitement of treasure hunts. Beneath this tree, buried shallow enough to be found by someone looking but deep enough to remain hidden from casual discovery, I unearthed my father's final message. It was a waterproof case containing a sealed letter addressed simply, "To Thomas." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The paper inside was covered with my father's handwriting, the ink slightly faded but still legible. My dearest son, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you have somehow found your way back to this place. I don't know how much time will have passed, whether you will come quickly or after many years. But I have made arrangements to ensure this message waits for you, and I have faith that someday you will return to where our story began. First, I must tell you that I love you. I have always loved you, even when my actions suggested otherwise. The choice to live this life, away from you and your mother, was the greatest regret and the greatest necessity of my existence. I could not be other than what I am, a witness to the wild, a chronicler of this vanishing world. But that doesn't excuse my failures as a father. The film you found contains my final photographs. They document something that must be seen, something I may have died trying to expose. If I've met an unnatural end, these images will tell the story. But more importantly, Thomas, I want you to know the truth about my life here. These animals, particularly the Kibali pride and their patriarch, Solomon, became more than subjects to me. They became my teachers in ways I never expected. From them, I learned that compassion exists beyond the human realm. I've watched these lions care for their wounded, share their kills with the vulnerable, and protect each other with fierce devotion. I've seen Solomon stand guard over a sick cub that wasn't his own, going hungry rather than abandoning his post. We humans think ourselves special in our capacity for empathy, but we are merely one expression of a universal tendency toward care that runs through all life. The lions taught me this, but I learned it too late to be the father you deserved. If Solomon still lives when you read this, you will know him by the scar across his muzzle and the unusual darkness of his mane. He is a remarkable creature who has shown me more trust than I likely deserve. He has been my constant companion these last years, often watching me work from the shade of a nearby tree, as if curious about what I find so interesting about his world. The greatest photograph I ever took, though it may never be developed on this roll of film, it shows Solomon and me together, captured with a remote trigger as we sat side by side watching a sunset. Two old predators, one with cameras, one with claws, finding common ground in the fading light. It is, I believe, the truest portrait of my soul that will ever exist. I hope someday you will understand why I lived as I did, even if you cannot forgive me for it. And I hope the film and this letter will offer you some peace. With all my love and regret, your father, Daniel. I lowered the letter, tears streaming down my face. Across the clearing, Solomon watched me with those ancient amber eyes, a living link to my father's final days. He loved you, I said aloud, the words feeling right despite their strangeness, and you watched over him. Solomon blinked slowly, a gesture I now recognized as one of acknowledgement. Then, with the dignity of age and wisdom, he rose and walked toward me, stopping just a few feet away. For a long moment, we regarded each other, man and beast, yet somehow connected by the ghost of my father who hovered between us. Then Solomon did something extraordinary. He turned his massive head to look at the setting sun, then back to me, as if inviting me to witness what my father had loved so much about this wild place. I raised my camera, capturing the old lion silhouetted against the blazing African sunset. In that moment, I felt my father's presence more strongly than I had since his death, not as a distant memory, but as a living connection to this place and this magnificent creature. The film from my father's camera proved to be more valuable than any of us could have imagined. When developed, it revealed not just breathtaking wildlife photography, but documented evidence of an organized poaching operation that had been targeting the reserve. The final shots showed men with heavy weapons skinning a lioness, her cubs cowering nearby. The date stamp matched the day before my father died. Among the authorities, the prevailing theory quickly shifted. My father hadn't died of a heart attack. He had been murdered by the poachers he'd photographed, who had then taken his camera but missed the film he had hidden. But the most powerful image, the one that would eventually become iconic, was indeed the final frame on the roll. My father sitting beside Solomon at sunset, both figures in profile, both gazing at the horizon with identical expressions of serene contemplation. My father had used a remote trigger to capture this extraordinary moment of cross-species connection. The photograph, which I titled "The Last Light," became the centerpiece of a global conservation campaign. The story behind it, including Solomon's role in leading me to my father's hidden legacy, captured the public imagination in a way that mere statistics about endangered species never could. With the proceeds from the exhibition of my father's final work, I established the Daniel Harlow Foundation for Wildlife Conservation, focused specifically on protecting the lions of the Masai Mara. The poaching ring was dismantled, its leaders prosecuted using evidence from my father's photographs. I remained in Africa for several months after my discovery, spending much of that time observing and photographing Solomon and his pride. The old lion seemed to recognize me now, often approaching to sit nearby as I worked, much as he had done with my father. Through the Foundation's work, we fitted Solomon with a non-invasive tracking collar, allowing us to monitor his movements and protect him in his twilight years. Researchers were astonished by his age estimates, put him at over 18 years old, an almost unheard-of lifespan for a wild lion. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the savanna in gold and crimson, I sat beside Solomon on the same ridge where my father had taken his final photograph. The old lion's breathing was labored now, his movements slower. We both knew he wouldn't see many more sunsets. "Thank you," I whispered, reaching out slowly to touch his graying mane, something I would never have dared months earlier. Solomon turned his massive head toward me, amber eyes meeting mine with that uncanny intelligence that had so captivated my father. In that moment, I finally understood what my father had discovered in this wild place connection that transcended species, a wisdom that couldn't be found in the civilized world he had left behind. Through Solomon, my father had learned the true meaning of compassion, the recognition of another's soul regardless of form, the acknowledgement of our shared journey through this brief existence. The following morning, Solomon was gone. The tracking collar showed no movement since dawn. When we found him, he was lying beneath the same baobab tree where I had discovered my father's journal, his massive body peaceful in death. We buried him there, beneath the ancient tree that had witnessed so much of our intertwined story. I remained until the task was complete, placing the last stone on the cairn with reverent hands. As I turned to leave, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: an old scar on the trunk of the baobab, long healed but still visible. It was my father's initials, D.H., carved decades ago when he first began his work in this wild place. Beneath it, I carved my own, T.H. Then, after a moment's reflection, I added a third mark, a simple lion's paw print. 3 souls connected across time and species, our stories intertwined like the roots of the ancient baobab reaching deep into African soil. I return to that spot every year now, dividing my time between London and the conservation lodge I built near the Northern Territory. I've followed in my father's footsteps, but charted my own path as well, documenting the lives of the Kibali pride and their descendants through photography and film. Sometimes, when the light is right and the savanna falls quiet at dusk, I could swear I see them, my father and Solomon, walking side by side along the horizon. In those moments, I understand that the greatest lesson my father learned, and the one he left for me to discover, was this: true compassion knows no boundaries of species or time or even death. It connects us, all human and animal, father and son, past and present, in a circle of care that, like the baobab, endures through generations. The last photo of my father was with a lion. But his legacy, and Solomon's, lives on in every frame I capture, in every conservation victory, and in the profound understanding that we are not separate from the wild world. We are an integral part of it, bound together by threads of compassion that, once recognized, can never be broken.